Well, welcome to First Thought. It will be a podcast by Galway International Arts Festival. And my name's Tiernan Henry, and I host this extravaganza called Vinyl Hours, which is essentially a series of conversations that we've been having with artists and creatives, tracing a musical journey through the soundtracks of their lives. Tom Waits reckons that songs are really just interesting things to be doing with the air. And on Vinyl Hours, we think talking about them isn't too shabby either, even if it's only bravado in the world of the Blue Nile. So you can listen to everything that we're going to be talking about on Galway International Arts Festival Spotify page. And if you like what you hear, please consider making a donation to the Galway International Arts Festival, a non-profit organisation bringing the arts to people in Ireland and around the world. Head to giaf.ie and click donate. But for tonight, we're going to talk to Philip King. And what can we say about Philip? Well, he's from Cork but lives in Kerry. And I think we could wrap the show up just there with that comment.
That's right.
But what else? We could be here all day reading his CV. But he's a producer, a director, a broadcaster, a musician, a singer. He's a founding member of the Rolling and Rattling Scullion. He's the soothing voice of The South Wind Blows. He's kick-started Other Voices, which are on tonight in St. Nick's. And he's brought it all back home. But for today, we're here to talk about some of the songs, the tunes and the music that moves him. So without further ado, could you please give a big welcome to Philip King?
Thank you very much.
Philip, it's great to have you here. Thank you so much for doing this. And we'll be playing snippets of the songs and the tunes that Philip's given us over the next while. And it's a fascinating, distinctive list of tunes and music you've given us. And it's a real invitation, which I think for us, it's a gift to us because it's an invitation into what you're listening to.
Sure.
And to what, stimulates you, I guess, and gives you a kick in the head or makes you want to dance or makes you want to think about things. Yes. So I suppose should we just start maybe with the first tune, or do you want to say a little bit about it first? Because we were going to start with the Dannon track.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just lovely to be in Galway.
Yeah.
It's lovely to be back in Galway. I spent a lot of time here. And I spent a lot of time with the late Alec Finn and with Dave Allen in the mid-70s up to the sort of into the 80s, and travelled with them and had a great time. And Galway was always that sort of, powerfully vibrant music town, music city, really. And I remember those days in Druid was beginning, that little front room of the Keys was the only room in the bar. And if you went across the road to Knocklands, you had to knock on the door and Jimmy would let you in if he liked you, and if he didn't, he wouldn't. But I heard some of the greatest music I've ever heard, and I've been on a musical expedition since I was a child. So I thought we'd start with music from what I think is probably, one of the top 3 records of Irish traditional music ever made. It's The Mist-Covered Mountain. And on this record, Charlie Pickett was still playing the banjo with the band. Mm-hmm. Jackie Daly had joined the band. And Tom Foydeen Tom was singing and Alec accompanying him in that sort of remarkable way that he did. And Sean O'Connor was singing as well, of Vakatuma Hay Machine. But there's a track at the end of the record that is so vibrant and powerful. And what there is here is, I think, just an enormous energy, really. And that filigree thing that Alec did, sort of seemingly effortlessly, I often asked him, how do you do that? He said, I don't know, it just happens. And so it's Langstrom's Pony. And just if you listen to just the very beginning of the thing, it's the attack, if you like, the way it jumps right into your heart. If you ever want to find a record of music and singing that is of its place and is timeless, it's that record for me. And Alec painted the cover as well, all the birds on the cover. So it was the complete thing, if you like. And it came out on the Gaelin record label. And it was just one of those things that, and I always have it with me, one way or the other, as a reminiscence about Galway, but something about the heart and the purity of traditional music that speaks so eloquently and naturally to me.
And that tradition, was that tradition part of what you grew up with, or is it something that you kind of grew into?
Well, I grew up in Cork City. Cork City, I mean, John Reedy lived up the road, who became Sean O'Riordan. His mother, Mrs. Reedy, and my mother used to go to 10:15 Mass in St. Augustine's, get the number 10 bus. And so there was this man living up the street. Seamus Murphy was living in Cork. The legacy of Frank O'Connor was still there. And that old sort of Cork Musical Society thing, and James N. Healy and that. And then, of course, Rory Gallagher was living in Cork as well. So, I mean, there was like a tradition of singing in Cork. You could call it quite a singing city, and if you listen to the accent, it's quite sing-songy. Yeah. You know, it goes up and down like that. You know, so it's there's something about it. There's something. So the notes of music that were dropped into my ear were, you know, wonderful and very various. Yeah. And I've been very lucky, really, that I never categorise anything. It's not just that or that. It's all music to me. Yeah. And somehow in my own expedition, everything was interconnected one way or another. Seamus Heaney once said to me, he said that translation is the way of playing a new tune on the old keyboard of tradition. Yep. And I know exactly what he means.
And didn't Costello just say recently about that song, one of his recent songs, he said, everyone always makes new toys from old pleasures.
That's right.
So everything just gets reworked. And he said, please rework it if you want, you know.
That's right, the Spanish version, yeah. I mean, that's right. And I mean, there's a case in point. We can go off down an alleyway here now, because I worked with Elvis a lot. And we made the Juliet Letters together, and we worked with Burt Bacharach. But again, at his heart, the amount of music that fell into his ear as a boy, from his father and his mother. His father was the trumpet player and the singer with the Joe Loss Orchestra. So all the charts were on the floor every week as they learnt what they had to learn for the dance next Saturday night. Yeah. You had to play the hits of the day, you know. And of course, Irish music mutated like that in America as well. Yeah. It left here in the heads and the hands and feet of migrants, economic migrants, and it reconstituted itself in different keys, in different time signatures, in the great cities of the eastern seaboard of the United States, you know, Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, and New York, Tin Pan Alley. We were just talking about it a little earlier on.
And you've brought up the States, because this brings us to we'll take the next two tracks together, essentially, because they work, well, you'll understand it, but when we play them, essentially. But the thing, I suppose, that links them to me is the harmonica.
That's right.
These are two harmonica tracks. Yeah. And it's a funny thing, this was something that confused me when I was a lot younger. I remember you used to hear about angels and their harps. Yeah. And to me, the harp was this thing. Yeah. And I think that was a much nicer thing for angels to have, rather than the stringed instrument, was to be able to haul out their harmonica and play that, you know.
The thing about the harmonica, you know, it's portable music, really. I mean, it's a little thing you keep in your pocket. I always have one. You know, and I got one because I heard Little Walter play the harmonica, the great Chicago harmonica player. And there's so much. So whether it was a cowboy playing Home, Home on the Range, or whether it was like a African American, you know, playing that electrifying sound of a harmonica. Yeah. And I've chosen two sort of, well, not odd pieces really, but the first one is quite odd. It's Captain Beefheart and his Magic Band, a man who deconstructed the blues really in California. He was, along with Frank Zappa and others, you know, quite out there in terms of, you know, what he went about. But in the early recordings, particularly the first album, Safe as Milk, Ry Cooder was playing on that record. He became more experimental. But this tune always, I loved this tune because there's a line in the song, he says, "Give me that harp, boy, that ain't no children's toy." Right? So it sort of seemed to give back some mojo to the harmonica, to the harp itself. Yeah. And of course then there's something quite angry in him, and he was always experimenting and always deconstructing and always pulling things apart. So we can hear that, and then we might segue into the second tune, which is one I think that you'll all know.
So if we go 3 and 2, that's the order we'll do them. Is that okay?
Yeah. So it's On the Road Again.
Yeah.
With Al the Owl Wilson playing the harmonica, which is just so compelling, and it has all the qualities of a classic recording. You could have played it 50 years ago when it came out, or you play it today, and it's as good, as current, and as pertinent as ever it was.
So it's canned heat.
Essentially. So here we go.
Yeah.
Well, my dear mother left me when I was quite young. There's, and of course, it is the blues, really. And I always found that the blues and the shandos had that sort of cathartic sort of power in them. And when you listen to the vulnerability of Al Wilson's voice, that high falsetto sound, and the beautiful harp, and as I said, the propulsive sound of the rhythm section, I just find something very emotional and very powerful in that music.
And very inviting. I think, again, like you were saying about Beefheart, like Beefheart has, he probably has rightly the reputation of being an awkward musical person.
Yes.
But it's astonishing when you listen to any Beefheart stuff, how much of it is so beautiful.
That's right.
He brings you in, and then he does all the weird stuff about 4 or 5 tracks in. But it's that, you can hear that root, that kind of howling wolf root in the two of them, that kind of Chicago blues.
And the Chicago thing, of course, and then, of course, the country blues became I suppose, the urban blues and the electric blues of Chicago. When the people migrated out from the Delta all the way up the Mississippi, found themselves, like a lot of Irish people. I mean, Captain Francis O'Neill, wrote down all of the Irish music in America, and in O'Neill's 1001, he was the chief of police in Chicago, and this music was being played at the same time. And I can't but remember, just a thought came into my head there, Tiernan. I was thinking about Langston Hughes, the great Harlem poet, and he said, there's one of those poems that was stuck in my head. I've got those sad old weary blues. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I wonder if I should get a gun and put myself away. I wonder if one bullet would do. As hard as my head is, it would probably take 2. But I ain't got neither bullet nor gun, and I'm too blue to look for one. So the blues is always a salve and a succor for me, but it always brings me home, the blues. And, when I hear Sean O'Connor sing, or when I hear Earlo Leonard sing, or, or I hear Dolores sing, and Rita and Sarah sing, it's all shot through with that sense of longing and loss, really.
Yeah, and there's again, we were talking briefly earlier about George Saunders, the American author, who's written a book about how to read Russian short stories, and which is really funny. It's a really, really funny book. But in one he said that one of the reasons he likes them, he said the stories are simple, clear, and elemental. And I was thinking that works so much for a lot of the music that we're talking about tonight, but for music in general. We can intellectualize it rightly, but we can also just enjoy it because we react to it when it is simple and elemental.
That's right.
And I think you're right about both the blues, but also the Irish tradition you've been talking about as well.
Well, the blues grows from somewhere, and shandos grows from somewhere, and it usually probably grows from a sense of loss, or exclusion, or difficulty. This is a way of, I suppose, cauterizing some of that, and making us feel a little bit better by singing out, if you know what I mean. I think Pete Seeger certainly believed that to be true.
And obviously it's a connection then, because people can connect to it, because they're singing about emotions, or they're singing about things that everyone experiences. So there's a root right in there for everyone.
That's right.
Yeah, that's me. That's where I am right now, or whatever. So and we want to move. We're going to jump way forward for your next track, which is to Leeds. Basically to Leeds last year, or this year, I guess,
This is a band called Yard Act, and they're 4 spiky young fellas from Leeds, probably in their early 20s, just in and out of probably university. And there's a coolness about them, but there is a real anger. And Frank Hart, the ballad singer and great ballad collector, used to say to me, he said, if you want to know the facts, consult the history book. If you want to know what it felt like, ask a singer. And I was thinking of what Frank said, as I listened to this for the first time recently, and just have a listen to it. It's probably in the tradition of the Clash and a little bit of sort of something else in there as well. But there's real palpable anger here. So this is 4 lads from Leeds on their way in the music business, and they're called Yard Act.
Yeah.
There is I think a remarkable change taking place in that country, and it is just so full of difficulty right now that I think it doesn't know its place in the world anymore. And I think that there are people, again, like these young lads, who encapsulate, if you like, a very simple message of displeasure and discontent and just not being happy with their lot.
Yeah,
and they say it so eloquently.
Yeah, and in a very simple sort of way. I mean, there's obviously it's extremely modern music. It's bang up to date music, but it's in a tradition, the tradition that we've been talking about, the tradition that we're going to continue talking about with the next few songs.
Yeah.
But it sort of fits into that notion of protest music.
Oh, absolutely. That's
to give out about the way things are, and to reflect, I suppose, a dissatisfaction with,
and to have a megaphone for your generation. Say like we feel terrible.
Yeah.
We don't feel good, and these are very dark days.
Yeah.
And they're dark days in so many more ways than one. And it's not just the political thing. And I think a lot of young people who are now digital natives, who I think would suffer from digital loneliness, what I would call it a digital loneliness syndrome, feel that their engagement with the ever-present smartphone, which is a computer but is also a surveillance device, they feel surveilled, but they have again, I suppose, it's almost like a drug-like dependence on the instrument. Somebody said to me the other day, he said, if I went out the front door without my trousers, it wouldn't be so bad, but without my phone, it would be terrible, and it's that level of dependence. But it's the surveillance piece. It's everything that you do at every moment is codified, owned, and leveraged for an outcome somewhere else. And, I suppose it's just a simplistic thing to say, if it's free, you're the product.
Yeah.
And I think that what a lot of young people are definitely feeling is a sort of an entrapped state, and I, lucky enough at my age, getting very old now, but to be working with a lot of very young people. And this comes up all the time. I can't put it down.
Yeah.
I can't leave Facebook. But you'd say to somebody, Facebook injures democracy. Let's say just as if you could say that, but nonetheless, we know it's a dangerous thing, but we can't put it down. So that implies a dependence to me, and very difficult to change. And I think it comes out in songs like that, in places like that, just an angry broadside full of invective,
Yeah, and I think in a way, because I suppose, certainly with the Yard Act, what it sounds like is it's built up. So this is pent up, and there's no avenue to get it out except I'm going to get it out in this 3 or 4 minute song.
That's right.
And then it's just going to spill out of me,
And this has been happening forever.
Yeah.
I mean, the popular music is full of that.
Yeah.
Nina Simone, Mr. Backlash. It's Bob Dylan. We could be at that for a long time. But it's a great release. It's a great release of pent up anxiety and worry.
Yeah.
And just to be able to say it out, that we are living through these dark times and I don't know what to do.
Yeah, and I think, moving, because the next 2 tracks actually just align nicely with that. And, one of them is Amazing Grace, which, came out of this frustration, say, about the slave trade in the earlier part of the 19th century in England. And then the second one is from the Dust Bowl, I suppose, from the late 30s, early 40s in the United States, and would have originated. Now, they're not obviously original versions we would be hearing, but they're that sort of thing as well. These are angry righteous reactions to what's going on around them. You know?
From two very powerful artists, really. The first one is, I had the great good fortune to work with Daniel Lanois. And Daniel Lanois is a French-Canadian who was living in New Orleans at the time. He was known as U2's producer. He produced a couple of records for Bob Dylan, produced the Oh Mercy record, which is a wonderful thing, and he produced it in New Orleans. I met him in Dublin when he was producing for U2, and we had a very interesting walk around Killiney, and we ended up walking back down Killiney Hill singing different versions of Little Sadie. And he had made a record that was really a French-Canadian record called Acadie, and it was acoustic music, basically. So we decided that what we would like to do is to make a film together. So we went from French-speaking Canada, where we worked with this family, came in with this family that were, sitting there like Irish people with a bottle of rum on the table, playing tunes on the fiddle and singing into the night. And we found ourselves then in New Orleans, of course, which is Louisiana, which also has that French connection. And he was living there, and he said that he went there, he said, to find the bottom end, to find that bass sound that he was looking for. And we were in his house, in his studio, on the edge of the French Quarter, and Aaron Neville of the Neville Brothers came in one day, along with Carole King and Paul Simon, and we were filming, and we asked Aaron would he sing a song, and Daniel had produced a record for the Neville Brothers called Yellow Moon, which Bob Dylan heard, and he heard them with God on our side, and he asked them to, etc. Yeah. But this version just happened in the room, and Declan Quinn, the great cinematographer, was working with me, and he rolled the camera, and we hit the button as Aaron began to sing, and this is what he sang, and it was like astounding to be in the room to hear it. It's sort of a remarkable day, and some years later, I was making a film called As I Was Walking Down Freedom Highway, which is called Freedom Highway, really, which is a line from a Woody Guthrie song about the political anthems of the 20th century. And I spent some time in South Africa working with Hugh Masekela and Jonas Kwanga and the Soweto String Quartet, which is another story in its entirety. But we found our way to the States, and we were in Buffalo in upstate New York, and we went to visit a singer called Ani DeFranco. She had just come back to Buffalo from California, and she ran a record company called Righteous Babe Records, and was this powerful, visceral sort of singer. But we were talking about Woody Guthrie, and we asked her to sing a song for us, and she chose this. And again, that notion of migration and movement of people, which is, so much with us right now after Afghanistan, as people begin to get on the move again, and we saw it with Syria, and of course we ourselves were economic migrants. And this is Woody's great song, If You Ain't Got the Do-Re-Mi, which of course is the migration of farming folk, really, from the Dust Bowl of Oklahoma to the promised land of California. But I think she inhabits the song. We were going to visit Pete Seeger the following day, and at the end of the song, she just said, I hope Woody would like this.
And as part of the same trip, I guess, you recorded with Tom Waits.
That's right. We went from Buffalo, and then we went back to the Hudson River, and Pete was living up the Hudson River with his wife Toshi, and we were good mates by then. I had made a series called Bringing It All Back Home back in 1990 for the BBC, and I met Pete at that time, and he was just very generous and very kind. And we went back there, and then we went west to California. And the story is, there are two stories here. I was looking for Tom Waits, and he's notoriously sort of shy, if you like, really, and any sort of invitations that are offered, he usually turns them down. But I remember we were trying to get in touch with him. Various different messages were left in various different places, the usual thing. And I was at home in West Kerry. I live about 8 miles west of Dingle. And the old telephone, before the mobile phone, the old telephone rang, and one of my children picked up the phone and said, phone call. I said, who is it? He says, a fella called Tom. And I said, I didn't. I just picked up the phone and said, hey, Tom here. He said, I believe you're looking for me. And one thing led to another. And we ended up in Prairie Sun, where he records in California. And we were to do 2 songs. And we ended up sort of spending all day there and recording a lot of bits and pieces. And I don't know if you know Tom Waits at all, or do you know his work, or what sort of a person he is. But he is he's remarkably creative. He definitely understands tradition, and he sings himself to where the singing comes from, in my view. And he's just a remarkable guy. But the story that I remember from that day was he arrived, in a pickup truck, as he would. And his son, Sullivan Waits, who eventually became his drummer, was with him. And with him he had a ship's piano, he had a banjo, an acoustic guitar, an old Dynacord electric guitar, and an amp. And we went into this barn of a place, and he said, okay. He said, I'll be right back. And himself and Sullivan went off, and they came back carrying a barn door with a hinge sort of attached to it that was swinging at the end of it. And he put it down on the thing, and he sort of jumped up on it, and he said, all right, I'll be right back. And he came back with a bentwood chair, which he put up on the door, and he sort of went, and it creaked, and he said, that's real good. And he went in, he said, I'll be right back. And he came back with a tambourine, a hammer, and a 6-inch nail. And he drove the nail through the tambourine and put it on the floor and went, right? I said, I'm ready. And he proceeded to regale us for 2 or 3 hours, and we filmed the whole thing. But one of the things I wasn't expecting was him to sing this song. And I let him introduce it, and it was one of the great songs. It's one of the great protest songs, and the great songs of injustice to a human being, written by the great Bob. One of his great songs, and just Waits talks about it at the very beginning. We know the way we often say in Ireland that of a great singer, the singer doesn't sing the song sings them. They're at one with the song. And, Waits was like that with this song. And it's, such a powerful song in the hands of Bob Dylan, but there was something just so visceral and powerful in the way that he declaimed the song in that little room. The sensation I had was that his voice was, I was sitting like where you are, and his voice was like a whirlwind, just the power of it, really. And the abandon with which he sang, and every word was important. And as I was just thinking there, actually, Tiernan, that Bob Dylan wrote that song. I can't remember the year, 64, 65, probably.
Yeah, 64.
And it was the classic tale of this woman who was a servant and killed by this brutish young man, as described there, with a tobacco farm and political power and clout, and of course he was white. And then I was just thinking of Baltimore and thinking of Randy Newman. Oh, Baltimore, man, it's hard just to live. And I did some conversations with David Simon, the guy who did The Wire, and again, just Baltimore, and a place that was like a sort of a crucible of real difficulty for African Americans. But it's amazing the way the songs can, highlight the plight of a place. You know.
And I think going back, it's like the way Waits talks about in the introduction about how there were so many newspapers, because Dylan has famously said about Hattie Carroll that he wrote it from the newspaper reports.
The Baltimore Sun.
Right. So he was reading about this case. So this was live. It wasn't historic. Yeah. This was happening. He was reading about it every day, and he wrote this song out of it. And I know the guy, the protagonist involved in the song, had sued
That's right.
But was found guilty,
That's
and
right.
they went back and they checked and they said, no, every detail in the song is correct because he literally wrote it from the newspaper reports,
That's right.
So, and then I think you're right, it's really interesting that the place is Baltimore.
Yeah.
And, and
you see it played out in Baltimore over the century,
Yeah.
really, in very dark and difficult ways.
Yeah. And then I think that brings us to your next track is kind of moving, it's staying with that experience in a way because the track is called A Song for Assata. And Assata Shakur was one of the key figures in the Black Power movement at the end of the 60s and early 70s, I suppose.
Yeah, and this is common
Yeah.
with CeeLo Green. And, I had worked in Philadelphia with some people when we were making Freedom Highway and sort of was around that world a little bit with a band called The Roots and, Questlove and, what he does and what he's been doing recently. I mean, he's the guy that put together the Harlem film that has just resurfaced after, more than 50 years, which is amazing if you get to see it. It's just remarkable stuff. And particularly the performance of Nina Simone is just singing that Backlash Blues is just amazing. I just felt it to be so powerful. And one of my favorite records out of America in the last 20 years just captures again the struggle and the difficulty for the African American right now.
Yeah.
And it doesn't get better,
No, it's still the story is still the same, and it's still again like listening to that track. It's like listening to the Tom Waits track or the Dylan track. It's reportage.
That's right.
This is essentially pulled from the news or pulled like that was from.
That's right.
Her biography, But
Yes.
so it's reporting, but in a way that people can access it as well.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And the next. We're going to take the next three as a group because they're really interesting in lots of different ways. But it was only when I was actually writing it, I was thinking, oh, he died, he died, and he died, and he died.
Yeah.
So there's this grouping of songs. So it's Randy Scruggs, it's John Prine, and it's the Everlys.
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, the first one is just one of the classic country songs, one of the great old Carter family tunes, written by A.P. Carter back in the day. And it was the beginnings, I suppose, of what we would call modern country music. And it's Emmylou Harris and Iris DeMent singing Wildwood Flower, the old Carter family tune with Randy Scruggs. And but I just fell in love with this. I met Emmylou first when I was Bringing It All Back Home, and she was just so kind. Such a beautiful person, and opened every door for me in Nashville. She was just a doll in every sense of the word. But her singing, and of course Iris and herself, really have something going. We'll talk about John Prine in a moment, but Prine and Iris had a great thing going as well musically. So what a beautiful song, and the lyric of the song, of course, so devastating. That it's a broken down love story. A.P. Carter and Mother Maybelle Carter alive and well in the voices of Iris and Emmylou singing in that high lonesome sound. I was saying to Tiernan a little earlier on that when I met Ricky Skaggs for the first time, we were in Jack Clement's studio in Nashville, and himself and Donal Lunny and Paddy Glacken played a version of the Blackberry Blossom, and we were talking about sort of the tunes of the songs and that thing, the high lonesome sound. And Ricky Skaggs said, he said that high lonesome sound, y'all, in Kentucky is the music remembering where it came from. And that's the sort of echo back to here, really. It's that sort of bouncing back. Yeah. And every time I hear Emmy sing and Iris, there's something of that in it. There's something of us in the DNA of that music.
And I think if you listen, the melody in that song, it's like the Dedanan track.
Yeah,
it brings you back to this kind of loop that's come back to it, that it just bounces along.
That's right, yeah. And of course he left me with no word of farewell, to be able to cloak the devastation of being left behind by a nasty man, And there it is, and there it is cloaked in sort of that beautiful sweet harmony.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You know, like the clear mountain streams, you know, from Appalachia.
Sure.
And then coupled with that, John Prine. That's
well, I mean, far from me. Like Prine just had everything as a songwriter. I always think of him as like Frank O'Connor or John McGahern or something. He's like a short story writer. Because if you listen to the lyric at the beginning of this song, the opening verse, so as the cafe was closing on a warm summer's night, Cathy was cleaning the spoons. The radio played the hit parade and I hummed along with the tune. She asked me to change the station. The song just drove her insane. But it wasn't the record playing, it was me she was trying to blame. And then the chorus, and the sky is black and still now, in the hills where the angels sing. Ain't it funny how an old broken bottle can look just like a diamond ring? John, I met John again around the same time, probably 88, 89, 90. We're going to be coming back to Galway to do a night for John on the 4th of October, which we're going to stream live from the Druid. And that'll be a thing. And some people are going to come and reminisce about John and his songs. But he was, I mean, Dylan referred to him as the great songwriter, you know. I think of Daddy, won't you take me back to Muhlenberg County down by the Green River where paradise lay? I'm sorry, my son, you're too late in asking. Mr. Peabody's coal train done hauled it away. So when I met John, we had sort of vibrant beer drinking afternoons. He made a record called German Afternoons, drinking German beer and playing some tunes, The Speed of the Sound of Loneliness. You could go on with you know, There's a Hole in Daddy's Arm, Where All the Money Goes. But I this one for me, it just has a short story, you know, I mean, as the cafe was closing, you're there instantly. On a warm summer's night, you know, you can smell the place, you know, it's just, he just had that real ability to, in very simple terms, it's so difficult to do, to tell it like it really is, and that the audience can feel it, that you feel it
instantly.
That's right, because we're not dealing with facts here; we're dealing with feelings, and you know these are the emotional histories of a people, really, sort of in song, you know, and it's been just my own journey has been, you know, just so enriched by meeting some of these people along the way, and I think we could have picked so many things from the Everly Brothers. I met Don and Phil again at the same time in Nashville, and this is one of their great songs. And I was watching. There's if you're interested in the Beatles and Paul McCartney in particular, there's a thing called McCartney 321 on Apple Plus TV at the minute. It's just him and Rick Rubin sitting in a room on a soundstage. And they have the Beatles archive tapes there, and they put them on and they sort of say, how did you do that? And how did the piccolo trumpet happen in Penny Lane? And, you know, that electric bass that you played, did you play it with a plectrum on My Guitar Gently Weeps or whatever? But as they're talking, McCartney talks about the Everly Brothers. And he says that, you know, when John and himself were growing up, they used to want to sing and play like the Everly Brothers. And he said, John was Phil and I was Don. And Don died last week, as some of you probably know. And in my view, without the Everly Brothers, the Beatles would not exist, and Simon and Garfunkel wouldn't exist either. It was that really close harmony thing that they had, which was absolutely amazing. I mean, in 1958, they made a record called Songs Our Daddy Taught Us, and they sang several songs that would have antecedents in Ireland, Rose Connolly being one of those ballads, Darling Don't Let Our Love Die. And one of the most treasured moments I have in music was sitting in a room in Nashville with the late Liam O'Flynn, the piper, and Donal, and Roy Husky Jr., the bass player. And, you know, when the Everly Brothers sat in a room and they started to sing, it was absolutely astounding. It was like magic. It was like, I would put it like sanctifying grace of some sort pouring all over you. The moment stopped because there was nothing like it. You know, it was just a beautiful, beautiful sound. And whether it was, you know, I'll Do My Crying in the Rain, which was written by Carole King and Harold Greenfield, or, you know, Cathy's Clown, and all those hits that they had between, say, 56 and 65. There was just something about them in the way that they sang. And of course, they came out of a well of tradition. Their father, Ike Everly, was a really good flat-picking guitar player. They began their careers on the radio, like many people did, doing sponsored programs. I don't know if any of you remember Radio Air doing sponsored programs all those years ago, but they were like sponsored programs, and, you know, Ma and Pa Everly, and they used to introduce the kids, and this is Don and baby boy Phil. And then they would sing something together. You know, it was just absolutely amazing. But I picked this track because there's something almost strident about it, and it's not as clean cut as the background. The other thing I think, just that I'm just riffing away here on myself, is that they were a crossroads as well between, I think, black music and pure country music. Because they took that rock and roll thing and that version of Lucille that they do, and, you know, Saturday Night and I Just Got Paid, you know, Rip It Up, you know, those songs. I mean, they could really do those Little Richard numbers, and they got on very, very well with them. But I picked this one because I think it reminds me so much of what the Beatles began to do, really. And it also has that Phil Spector wall of sound thing going on. It's just huge. And it's just the condensed sound of this thing, the wall of sound, and this miraculous family harmony thing. And just, I suppose, the sassiness of Temptation is just fantastic. So it's just such, again, inhabiting the song and singing with such sort of abandon. And these are the days of, like, you know, 2-track, 4-track recording. You know, there's no 8 tracks or big multi-tracks. You walked in the room, you recorded the song, you know, in a 3-hour session, and you probably did 2 or 3 of them. But they could do that sort of thing. And the other thing I remarked on when I was in the room with them and had the great good fortune to be in the room with them is when they sang, they never took their eyes off each other. They looked at each other all the time. They were like that. You know, and so it was just that family thing, I guess. And I have triplet children, and 3 girls, but they're old now. But, like, I was just thinking about this, that they acquired language slower than a single child, because what I found out was that the acquisition of language is dependent on an eye line to the mother or the father. So you couldn't be looking at 3 of them at the same time, right? So, but it just struck me with the Everlys, that family thing, almost like twins, that they had that thing. I mean, nobody could work out who was singing what. You know, if you tried to pick it apart like a child with a toy, to work out who was singing what part, they could just do it. And like Don said to me, like, I mean, they never actually had to. There's the song. They could just do it.
And when you listen to it, there isn't a wasted moment in it. Do you know, at the start, and then its voice, and a line finishes, and the next line starts.
Yeah. But of course, the thing is the ripple. The ripple is that, you know, the Beatles. I mean, you can hear it. You know, I mean, Love Me Do, Can't Buy Me Love. Those early songs, big hits, Please Please Me, in particular. It's there. That Everly Brothers thing is present. So both of them are gone now. So I just thought it would be a nice thing just to sort of close me out and remember them, you know.
Yeah, and we're coming to the end now, Philip. So your last choice for now is, you know, because we could go on. When Philip sent me the list originally, with a very, very long list of songs, we could have sat here all night listening to some great stuff.
Yes.
But it's Gillian. You want to finish? Gillian Welsh.
And David Rawlins. They wrote this song. It's self-explanatory, really. You know, when Spotify, or Napster rather, in about 2001 arrived, the economics of music as a business for the artist and the writer in particular changed forever. Because the dissemination, again, to go back to the phone, everything is accessible now. You can just go, there it is, there it is. You know, 5 million plays on Spotify will get the writer of the song, 2 and 6. Or, it's just, that's the way it is. And Gillian Welch was making this record. She'd been dropped. They'd been dropped by the record company, herself and David. And they had formed their own record company called Acclaimed Bell Records. And again, there's a purity in the singing and in the guitar playing here that has a touch of the very early Everly Brothers. That certainly has a touch of the Carter family. Yeah. And I'm not going to say anything about the lyric, but you just listen to it. And there's some real anger here, I think, in the way that the message of this song is voiced. So just have a listen to this. And can I just say that it's a real delight to be here at the Galway Arts Festival. It's a delight to reacquaint with Tiernan. We soldiered together on the radio many years ago. And, we both love music. It's been the guiding light of my life and has brought me on my musical expedition out to the world to remarkable places and remarkable rooms. And I'm just entirely grateful that for the life that I've had in music and in capturing some of that music along the way. There it is, that profound apathy and that sense in the song. They figured it out. We're going to do it anyway. Yep. Even if it doesn't pay. And it's a very difficult place. Artists have been through a terrific trauma in the last 2 years. Existential crisis in a profound way in terms of income and no shows, but also emotionally bereft. And artists contribute to keeping us sane, ameliorating anxiety, giving us salve and succor and help. And, I noted Hugh Lenihan's piece in the Irish Times, to sort of say that maybe the state still doesn't fully understand the power and the profound effect that, and needed effect that art and music have for us all. And I think it's just encapsulated in that song in a very sort of beautiful way. I think there's resignation and anger in it. And I think that resignation and anger is manifest in a lot of artists that I've met over the last couple of years. But, we're going to do it anyway. And we're going to continue to do what we do anyway. And there it is. So I hope you enjoyed the music.
It's great. Philip, thank you so much for doing this. I hope everyone enjoyed this. And you're right, I think, Philip, we're going to do it anyway. And music is so important to us. I think that's the thing that...
It's our emotional, right, I think it's our emotional language, isn't it?
But it goes back to, as you said, that I think that there's not a recognition of it because it's everywhere. So I think it's just accepted.
Yeah.
But it's actually really important to us as well.
Yes, it is. And maybe we could end, actually, just as I was just thinking, I was thinking about Moya Cannon's poem, carrying the songs. It was always those with little else to carry who carried the songs. It's a beautiful poem if you ever come across it. Have a listen. But then when I was thinking about and looking at the news and thinking about Afghanistan, Jalaluddin Rumi, the poet, was reputed would have been born in what is now modern day Afghanistan, and he has a beautiful poem that goes, and maybe this could bookend our chat. But I see if I can think of it now. He says, "Don't worry about saving these songs, and if one of our instruments breaks, it doesn't matter. We have fallen into the place where everything is music. The strumming and the flute notes rise into the atmosphere, and even if the whole world's harp should burn up, there will still be hidden instruments playing. So the candle flickers and goes out. We have a piece of flint and a spark. This singing art is sea foam. The graceful movements come from a pearl on the ocean floor. They derive from a slow and powerful root that we can't see. So stop the words now. Open the window in the center of your chest and let the spirits fly in and out."
Thank you.
There you have it.
Thank
Right,
you.
okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.